Hello and welcome. Today we're going to unpack a term that, for many, brings up a really specific and turbulent time in India's history, the Jungle Raj of Bihar.
But before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's just start with a bigger idea. What actually happens to a society when the very systems that are supposed to protect it just stop working?
That question, it leads us straight to our topic today. So what exactly was this thing people call Jungle Raj? Well, Jungle Raj sounds dramatic, right? But it's not just some buzzword. It describes a very real time, mostly through the 1990s and into the early 2000s, when the state of Bihar was basically gripped by chaos. We're talking about a near-total breakdown of law and order and an administration that seemed completely paralyzed.
So, how on earth did things get so bad? To really get it, you have to look at the anatomy of this lawlessness. It kind of stood on three really chaotic pillars.
The first pillar was, to put it simply, crime that was just out of control. And I'm not talking about petty stuff. This was an era where kidnapping for ransom became a full-blown cottage industry. Extortion was just a part of doing business. And you had these horrific caste massacres and politically motivated violence tearing through communities. The criminals? They pretty much operated like they could get away with anything.
Now, you might be wondering, how could crime flourish like that? Well, that brings us to the second pillar. The institutions themselves were weak. They were broken. The police didn't have the resources they needed, corruption was everywhere, and politics had its fingers all over law enforcement. The very system that was meant to uphold the law was, well, it was either unable or, in some cases, maybe even unwilling to do its job.
And look, this wasn't just a feeling people had on the street. It got so bad that in 1997, the Patna High Court, the highest court in the state, had to officially call out the government for severe administrative neglect. You know the situation is absolutely critical when the courts have to step in and say that basic governance has failed.
And the third pillar? This one's tough. It's about deep, long, simmering social tensions just exploding. Caste conflicts turned incredibly violent. And this was fueled by the rise of private militias. These are basically private armies, like the Ranveer Sena on one side and various malice groups on the other. It just created this brutal, vicious cycle of revenge killings that absolutely tore the social fabric of the state apart.
This level of violence was so extreme that it really needs a closer look. It led to what many now remember as the era of massacres.
The human cost here is just staggering. Let's just consider three of the most infamous massacres. Batani Tola in 96, 21 people lost their lives. Then Laxmanpur Bathe in 97, where 58 Dalits were killed. And Senarari in 99, where 34 upper caste individuals were killed in a revenge attack. These weren't just isolated events, they were a horrifying signature of the times.
You add that up, that's 113 lives. 113 people gone in just those three incidents. That number alone just underscores the sheer scale of the brutality we're talking about.
And beyond these huge massacres, another crime really defined this period. Kidnapping for ransom became so common that people just started calling it an industry. Businessmen, doctors, even students were targets. It created this constant climate of fear for anyone who seemed to have any money at all.
Now you might be thinking, wow, that sounds awful. But it's all in the past, right? Well, not exactly. The Jungle Raj left a deep, violent legacy that the state is honestly still dealing with today.
The data tells a really interesting story. In 2005, which was near the end of that main Jungle Raj period, Bihar had about 104,000 criminal cases reported. Fast forward to 2020, and that number shot up to 250,000. It more than doubled. Now that could mean a few things, maybe better reporting, maybe different types of crime, but no matter how you slice it, it shows the problem didn't just vanish.
And that trend is still going. In just the first 6 months of 2023, there were over 150,000 cases recorded. So this isn't some historical issue. It is a very current, very real challenge.
Members can feel a little abstract, so let's put a face to them. Think about a recent case, the murder of a businessman, Gopal Khimka, back in 2023. It all started with a land dispute. It's a modern-day example of the kind of violent, organized crime that really has echoes of that past era. When you put it all together, it points to a pretty sobering reality. Bihar's struggle with law and order is far from finished.
You can draw a pretty direct line from the past to the present. The themes are just disturbingly familiar.
The raw, unchecked criminality from back then, it's evolved into more sophisticated, organized crime. And that politicized police force? It's left behind a deep public distrust and this nagging perception of corruption. The challenges have changed their shape for sure, but they have not gone away.
Now, it's not all bad news. I want to be clear about that. There has been real progress. Some of the culprits from those horrific massacres have, after very long trials, finally been convicted. And in some of these more recent cases, like the Gopal Khemka murder, police action was actually quite swift. But the feeling that politics still interferes, and these deep-rooted cycles of crime, it just shows how hard it is to shake off this kind of legacy.
And so, that brings us right back to where we started, with a big question. The story of Bihar's Jungle Raj, and everything that's followed, really forces us to ask, how does a society actually break a cycle of crime and impunity? What does it really take to rebuild trust in the very institutions that are supposed to be there to protect you? That is the challenge that remains.